Hello. So let us now move to the bishop b5 a6, which is a main move. This used to be for ages, even though now knight f6 Berlin defense is extremely popular, but still a6 is not refuted. And there are quite many options for black, quite many variations, which are, according to the modern state of theory, doing pretty well for black. I mean, white is objectively struggling to get an advantage. But of course, it's also neither of those variations are easy for black, and it requires lots of knowledge, lots of concrete knowledge, and white has quite a number of options always in all of those lines. So today I would like to start with open Spanish, so-called knight f6, knight takes e4 variation. So basically it's like Berlin, but just with the moves a6, bishop a4 included, which actually makes a big difference. So the type of position is it's totally different to the Berlin variation. Also during this lesson, I'm going to present you some other options for white, where white is trying to avoid this knight f6, knight takes e4 line. So first is bishop takes e6, the so-called exchange variation of Ruy Lopez, dc6, castles. Well, the pawn on e5 obviously is not hanging, because of queen d4, and then attacking the knight and the pawn on e4. So usually white castles. Well, this variation is really now out of fashion. The problem is that, of course, it makes some sense because, well, since black have just played a6, so instead of losing a tempi on bishop a4, you just take on c6 and castle. So it's quite logical, and Robert James Fisher was quite successful playing this variation with white. Well, I have to mention that he was successful with most of the openings, mainly due to the fact that he was simply a better chess player than his opponents. But anyway, at that time, before computers, of course, it was much more difficult for black to equalize in many lines. In fact, now, with the help of computers and a lot of tournament practice, well, somehow it looks like black has many different ways of playing against this system, and well, most of those are doing well. So somehow it's not clear what is the gain for white playing this variation, because most of the logical moves are standing well according to the theory. Even illogical moves, I would say, like queen f6 is actually nowadays quite popular, and it seems to be also doing pretty well. Okay, if d3, knight e7 is quite good according to the theory, and if d4, e takes d4, bishop g5, and now queen d6, there is some theory, but I think black doesn't really have much problems here. Then there is for instance, the old main line, which is f6, a very logical move. Now white is practically forced to play d4. And then e d4, knight takes d4, c5, old main line. So white usually retreats with a knight to e2, sometimes to b3. Then the queens are exchanged. White has a small pressure still in this endgame, but really not much. And already there were a lot of games, and I think black found ways to equalize slowly but surely. Also, by the way, there is quite an interesting move, knight e7, which is at least statistically doing quite well for black. And on top of that, I don't even mention there are some other moves, like, for instance, there is a strange move, knight e7, also possible here. But actually, bishop g4 is also a very solid line. The idea is that after h3, black has h5. And, well, hg doesn't lead anywhere, because you cannot keep the piece because of the mating attack on h line. So here also usually white is just playing d3, black's main continuation is queen f6, and again there is a lot of theory, but it seems that also black is doing perfectly fine here. So all in all, okay, of course it's a playable variation. You can, if you like it with white, it's handy because a6 you just take castle and you don't need to learn all those main lines of Ruy Lopez, but frankly, yeah, I don't think it is objectively dangerous. And for those of you who like to play Ruy Lopez with black with a6, well, you can just choose a line to your liking. Of course, you need still to study it, of course, a bit to check the latest games, but I don't really see a problem here for black in few ways actually. So I think it's just a matter of choice, but objectively, again, not a dangerous variation for black. Therefore, let's come to bishop a4, knight f6, and today we are going to analyze this castles knight takes e4. But before, well, let's check what are the other options for white. Queen e2 is always possible, but you know, in all those Italians or Ruy Lopez, in general, usually queen is not the place for the queen on e2. So most of the time, when all those lines when white is playing queen e2 are not really dangerous for black. So black can play, depending on what variation you prefer against a main line with black. So if you want to play with bishop c5, then let's say b5, bishop b3, bishop c5 seems to be just a better version of those variations, which we'll consider in our next lesson. But also bishop e7 is perfectly fine. Again, the pawn is not hanging. Because knight takes e5, queen d4, and getting the pawn back. And after castles b5, bishop b3 castles, and after c3, black has d5 move, and it's similar to the Marshall variation, black is having a good game here. I think taking the pawn on e5 is more dangerous than with a rook on e1. So probably white's best move is d3, but yeah, it's perfectly fine for black. So queen e2 is really, I wouldn't recommend you with white to play it. Then if you want to avoid knight takes e4, then rather I would recommend you to play d3 maybe. But before moving to this variation, let's check the d4 move, e4 castles. Now bishop e7 is the safest and probably the best move. This is a very important actually variation, because it can get we can get here via different move orders. You can also castle bishop e7, play d4 with white, and even via Berlin, knight f6, d4, e4 castle. Then I saw that a6 was the best move there, transposing to this position if white wants. And a very principled way of playing for white, but I think it's just already sterilized. You just need to know a bit of theory here with black, but I don't see a slightest idea for white in this line. So it's already not played on the top level. Can be maybe used as a surprise weapon in rapid or blitz chess, but objectively I think it's totally empty. Because let's say if rook e1, then black is playing b5. Now bishop b3, d6. White's problem is that he cannot even take the pawn on d4, because then the typical story, of course, comes that you take c5 followed by c4, winning a piece. That's why the main theory is bishop d5. Here takes knight e5, knight takes d4, castles, and actually this position is simply slightly better for black. I remember I won myself a rapid chess game against Laurent Frissonnet here with black. Knight c3, for instance, rook e8, not the only move, but the move which computer likes most. And in fact, white is struggling to equalize here, so that is not an option for white really. Better is e5 maybe, but then knight takes e5, rook takes e5, and now everything is okay. Even b takes a4, which was considered to be a bit dangerous, but because of knight takes d4, but then still after castles, it seems that nowadays computers are showing that black is at least equal here. Or if you want, the old main move is d6, and now, if rook e1, ba4, obviously black cannot have slightest problem here. And after rook takes e7, queen e7, bishop b3, black is playing c5 against threatening c4, and it seems to be better for black as well. So that's why in this position white usually plays e5, knight e4, knight takes d4, castles, and not so many options actually for white here. Knight f5 is the main move. Another option is rook e1, but then knight takes d4. So the idea is if white takes queen d4, then, the simplest is probably knight c5, then you just want to play d6, take the bishop on a4, and having no problem at all for black. And let's say if rook takes e4, then you play knight e6, knight c3, knight c5, rook d4, and f6 is the simplest, and black has a very good game here. So knight f5, the old main line is actually d5, which is doing also fine. Knight e7, knight e7, c3, let's say knight c5, bishop c2, bishop f5. It's very important that black is in time to exchange the bishops, and is having, a perfectly fine position, no problem really. But lately computers even like to play knight c5, which seemingly looks a bit dangerous, but queen g4, g6, but I think that it's also perfectly okay for black. Of course, pre-computer era, nobody wanted to play like this with black because of all those, black squares. This knight on f5 is a bit dangerous, but computers are, they don't care about all this, and if it works, it works, and according to machines, it works perfectly. So all in all, d4 is also not dangerous. But d3, that is a serious move. That is much more serious. Actually, the idea is white. You see quite often in Ruy Lopez nowadays, in all those lines with bishop e7, white anyways very often is trying to play d3, and then that we will check later during our lessons on the bishop e7, so the main line of Ruy Lopez. But the idea is that with this move d3, white wants to avoid knight takes e4 variation, and most of the time trying to transpose to those types of position, which he anyway quite often is going for in the main lines of Ruy Lopez. So let's say d6 is a very solid move. Of course, then white is playing c3, black can already do g6, castles, bishop g7, and so on. It's rook e1, black castles, it's knight bd2. It's a game, I wouldn't say that white is necessarily better, not really, but as you will see later on during our lessons on the main lines of Ruy Lopez with bishop e7, this type of position is perfectly playable for white. And here what is important that if black sooner or later, very likely black is going to play b5, then white's bishop will retreat to c2 immediately, not to b3, but to c2, which gives him half tempi, I would say. And at least it's playable for white. I wouldn't say that there is a big danger. You can perfectly play it with black also, but still it's not a kind of bulletproof equality. Now if you want, anyway, if you are playing lines with bishop e7 in Ruy Lopez, so if you are not taking after castle, if you don't not playing knight takes e4 or bishop c5 lines, then you can actually with black just play b5 and bishop e7, and the difference is that usually you have castles, both sides castle already in this position. Here it's not the case yet, but most probably it will happen anyway. So I don't think any side can really gain much trying to make use of the fact that both sides haven't castled yet. So let's say if white plays a4, then black can proceed with his usual b4 move. I mean, one of the variations which we're going to consider later. Or bishop b7. I think anyways it will lead to transposition, so both sides will castle sooner or later. So that is the simplest way, again, if you are playing bishop e7 variation with black. But if not, then probably you should try to play with a d6, g6, whether b5, bishop c5, or bishop c5 immediately. Actually, b5, bishop b3, bishop c5. Of course, as we will analyze this whole concept of putting the bishop on c5. Well, usually white is trying to get an advantage by playing d4, c3, d4. Well, with a pawn on d3, normally doesn't really give white anything. But here, since both haven't castled yet, white has a couple of interesting options. One is knight c3, d6, knight d5. It's not so simple. I think black is equalizing here with accurate play h6 because bishop g5 was threatening, and then c3. But there is a venom on this in this variation because the main difference is compared to Italian that normally the pawn is on b7, in Italian. Then you could have just taken on d5 very often. Here, knight takes d5, there is bishop takes d5 and a bit of annoying pin. So black, maybe bishop e6 is actually enough to equalize. But okay, it's a bit tricky, because you have to watch out for all kind of d4 ideas. Usually the old main line is rook b8, castles, d4, bishop a7. White is playing bishop e3. There is quite some theory here. And, at least in my time when I analyzed this variation, black was, finally able to equalize here. But you need to know this line with black because otherwise at least white has a center and quite a healthy position, so you need to be accurate here. But actually nowadays c3 becomes quite popular, and after d6, I saw lately even d5 was played, ed5, knight d5 looks extremely dubious to me. To be honest, with this pawn on b5, very shaky. But who knows? Maybe it works. At least I saw it's really like the last fashion. I saw some games in rapid chess mainly, but on quite top level. I saw Mamedjarov playing it, Dubov. So maybe it is something to investigate with black. But normally black is playing d6, and now an interesting move is bishop g5. Because again, castles h6 must be fine for black. But after bishop g5, it seems to be that it might get to a slightly better version for white of those Italians with bishop g5, if you remember. This variation, g5, bishop g3, because of the pawn on b5. So sometimes all those ideas of the bishop d5, sometimes a4, hard to say if it's better version, really better version for white or not. But at least I saw that Alexander Grishuk played it a lot lately and with quite a success. So this might be an interesting line for white. And definitely if you play b5, bishop b3, bishop c5 with black, you also need to to study it. I think it's maybe the only, the main danger of this move order for black. But maybe actually bishop c5 immediately is more precise in my opinion, because first of all, knight c3, of course you can play b5 still, and after bishop b3 to it's a transposition, d6, knight d5, to this variation which I've just mentioned. But in fact, knight c3, the simplest is just to start to play d6 here, and black is fine. Because after knight d5, you can always take on d5 already, and ed5, b5. So that's why knight c3 is not really working anymore. But white can play c3. And at least now, first of all, you can play b5 again and to transpose to bishop b3 variation, because bishop c2 here, d5 works already perfectly fine. So white's best is anyway bishop b3, but maybe d6. Actually, this move order is possible here, and I think I've checked it, and if I remember well, it was what I actually wanted to play with black some years ago, and I couldn't really find anything special for white, because the main idea is that after d4, bishop a7 works, and the idea is that after d5, black has b5, dcba, and he's having a very good game here. If castles and bishop a7, so black is not hurrying, playing b5 here, and so castle bishop e7, and for instance, some kind of Italian can rise, like h3 castle, rook e1, and maybe knight e7. But it might be sort of extra tempting actually for black in Italian, because white has played bishop b5, bishop a4, and bishop c2, and black anyway in Italian is playing a6, bishop a7. So it seems like a good Italian for black, shouldn't be any problem. So maybe still white can try to play bishop g5 here, but probably it is a better version for black, without b5, bishop b3, and after bishop a7, knight bd2, let's say h6, bishop h4, g5, bishop g3. Maybe, for instance, there is some idea I saw recently, some strong player played bishop d7 followed by knight e7 and knight g6, or maybe even castles, although of course always have to be careful playing g5 and castles, but at least computers, they approve it, and after computers do not find anything better than castles also. And now knight e7 already works, and this is quite a difference compared to Italian, because after d4, a typical reaction, because in those positions, if black just manages his knight to g6, he will be doing very well. So d4 and now knight h5. It's a very important tactical resource. d, knight g3, hg, d. And if I understand correctly, after knight takes e5, there is queen d6 move, and somehow taking back the pawn on g3, in all variations, because for instance, after knight f3, there is g4. So it works tactically. So, but anyway, all in all, d3 is a playable variation for white. Definitely, there is much less theory than after castles, and it's a good side option, I would say, if you play Ruy Lopez, just to have it, for some games, d3, that you want to avoid all those tons of theory, and it's not totally harmless, as for instance, in my opinion, queen e2 or d4 moves. But I'm also sure that playing black, depending on what system you play against the main lines, you will find your weapon here against d3, and it will not cause black player too many problems in general. So then white castles normally, and knight takes e4. Well, actually, a very logical way of playing. I always was wondering, because I was a d4 player, and haven't played Sicilian against c4, and I even in the 90s, when I saw everybody playing bishop e7 and all those slow Ruy Lopez like Zaitsev or Chigorin, I was always wondering that, okay, I mean, it's very logical to take on e4. I mean, the pawn is hanging, so it must be a real test that actually finally those intuitions of mine led me to play in Berlin, actually, because I thought knight f6, knight e4 is a real test, but also here a6 and knight f6, knight e4, of course, it's a very principal variation. Actually, I think, as I understand, according to the state of theory nowadays, it's doing very well. I don't see any advantage for white in this variation. I'm a bit surprised why it's not that popular. There was a time, maybe a few years ago, when this variation was extremely popular. Then maybe it's a matter of fashion. I don't know, maybe some new powerful computers, on top level finds some little problems here and there for black, but frankly, I don't see any advantage for white. The only problem of this variation, if you're playing it black, that you need to know a lot of very forced lines, you need to have a good memory, to memorize a lot of theory. And most of the time, black is actually not really having any realistic winning chances. So it's just trying to make, well, I would say, if you're talking about the top level chess, to make a forced draw, basically, after knight takes c4. And I remember Ding Liren played it for quite a long time and made many forced draws. He's a very strong player and also a very good theoretician. So all in all, yeah, a very serious test for white. If you're playing Ruy Lopez with white, you really need to have something against this system. So now I'm going to show you what are the options here which white has. He has quite a number of options. Some are more dangerous, some less dangerous. In most of those variations, black has to just be very accurate to analyze it well and just to make a kind of, to remember lots of forced long lines and to try to make a forced draw. But the problem, which is sometimes not, well, obviously not to everyone's liking, well, the only little problem of white is that seemingly, again, at least according to the modern state of theory, black is actually managing to make this forced draw everywhere. So yeah, now let's come back to the theory. So after knight takes c4, d4 is considered to be the main move and almost the only move for quite a long time. Well, it was like the forced move to fight for advantage, but lately computers found rook e1 idea, which might be interesting also, at least to try. I doubt it objectively gives white an advantage, but black has to know what to do against it. Knight c5, bishop takes c6, dc6, knight takes c5. Well, if d4, then actually e4 seems to be doing well. But after knight takes c5, well, normally, of course, the pawn structure is not dangerous because black has two bishops, and it's just about a very concrete play. Black has to be in time to castle. And for instance, if he's playing bishop e7, the most logical move, then white tries to do something like that. d4, knight e6, bishop e3, castle c4, followed by knight c3. And maybe is having a bit of pressure because of this knight on e6 and the bishop on c8, which is a bit passive and not so clear what to do with a knight on e6. So it seems to be playable for white. Then the other options, black can try to play knight e6 with the idea, let's say, against d4, maybe he can actually already put the bishop on d6. But then white is playing queen h5, queen f6, d4. And now, for instance, g6, queen d1 back, bishop g7, knight d2, followed by knight df3. And again, the same story. Black has, well, small issues with this knight on e6. I don't know if it's anything really special for white, probably not, but still, well, it's not totally equal yet, at least. And then another way of playing is bishop e6, well, trying to play knight d7 after d4. Then again, queen h5, and something like that, queen e7, d4, knight d7. You can check this. I mean, again, I'm sure that black will be able to equalize with good analysis, but it's definitely a try with white. And you can analyze it and have it in your pocket as one of the weapons against open Ruy Lopez. This rook e1 move, not as harmless as it was considered for many years, in fact. But anyways, d4 is the main move. And now, well, the old, very famous old line, which is ed4, I mean, a century ago, people were trying to equalize like this, but it seems not to work because after rook e1, d5, the knight takes d4 is actually the main move here, and it leads to an advantage to white's. It's in white's favor, but in fact nowadays computers also find that bishop g5 is also strong, and if queen d6, c4, and white is better, but knight takes d4 is good enough. So all in all, ed4 is not playable in my opinion, because knight takes d4, bishop d6. knight takes c6, bishop takes h2 check. This was the idea of black. So the idea is that after king takes h2, black checks on h4 and then takes on f2 and gives perpetual simply. Yeah? But it seems that king h1 leads by force to a better endgame for white. Queen h4, rook takes e4 check, d4, queen d8 check, queen d8, knight takes d8 check, king takes d8, king takes h2. I remember, I think Capablanca won this endgame against somebody. So this line was known already a century ago. And true, white is better in this endgame. So ED4 doesn't seem to be a good idea. But actually, lately, I see more and more on the top level bishop e7 move, which actually has to be checked very carefully, because, I mean, visually it looks really awful, the position after rook e1, and this is pretty forced. Black is playing b5 now. Rook takes e4, d5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, rook takes e5, ba4. Well, looks like black is in real trouble after knight c3, and that's why this line was always considered to be dubious. But I saw Mamedov playing this line, and even Magnus Carlsen in Rapid Chess, and maybe it's not so easy for white to get an advantage. Again, you need powerful, if possible, powerful engines to analyze it. I'm not sure it fully equalizes, but again, it's not that bad because there are some tries. I think white is trying to play queen e1 and just trying to fight against black castle, something like this, bishop e6, f4. It's one of the ideas, trying to push f5. But of course, the most natural is knight c3, and now black simply castles and just giving up all the pawns. But after, for instance, rook takes d5, bishop d6, bishop g5, queen e8, well, it's not so clear if white is better here. So this is something to analyze for each color. But normally, of course, black is playing b5, bishop b3, d5. So this is Tabia. I mean, d takes e5. Actually, knight takes e5 also makes some sense. Takes, and now c6, so bishop e6. Also possible c6, knight d2. Of course, in general, the knight on c6 is quite a problem in this variation, and black sooner or later has to, in this position after d, bishop e6, so sooner or later black has to do something about this knight, moving it away and trying to play c5. So in some sense, of course, here it makes black's task easier. From other point of view, white has this f3 ideas, f4, so he can push the f pawn. All in all, I don't think it gives white an advantage, but again, it's a try. So black has to know this variation, what to do against it. In my opinion, both moves are okay, c6 and bishop e6, but still, just wanted to draw your attention that this knight takes e5 is also not totally harmless. But normally d5 is the main move, bishop e6, and this is a Tabia. Well, strategically, black has active pieces, and everything is quite okay and no weaknesses. But there is a strategical danger because of this pawn structure, the pawn on c7. So and this knight on e4, which is kind of can be attacked in many variations. So let's say if black is playing it too slow, this position, then white just develops. Let's say if knight d2, if black, let's say, exchanges this knight, then bishop d2, c3, rook e1, bishop c2, strategically the position can become very dangerous for black because white has a potential attack on the king side. But that's why this variation was not so popular again before the computers era, because there is a strategical danger. White has quite a number of different systems and ideas. Still, Viktor Korchnoi used to play it against Anatoly Karpov in the match in 78, I think, and in 81. 81, it was not that successful because Karpov and his team found lots of new ideas at that time, which were very dangerous, and he won a couple of games very convincingly in this system. But now of course, computers got into the business, and this variation is actually very direct. Yeah, you need to know a lot of theory here, especially with black, of course, because it's more white who has a choice here. Even though, yeah, as you will see later, black also can choose, but again, with all minuses of being forced playing black this variation, being forced to learn a lot of theory, and sometimes analyzing it very deeply, just holding a slightly worse position, but actually with a very good chances to make a draw, basically drawish positions, but still white has some options where he's a little bit better, anyways. But again, on the top level, with the help of computers, actually, the players, they manage to make draws in those lines. And as I understand the modern state of theory, there is no real advantage for white here, even though, again, many tries and lots of memorization for black is required. And again, the position is very tricky and balanced, so you never know, some new engines might come, they're getting stronger and stronger, and they might pose some problems here. So it's not that the assessment of this variation is already clear and it's forever. Yeah, not really. But again, for now, I think black is able to equalize in all lines with a lot of knowledge and homework. So Queen E2. Let's check all the major lines. Of course, I cannot really tell you everything because there is simply no time. There are all kind of moves like A4 and so on, but I just will show you the main lines, the most dangerous continuations for black. But if you decide to play it with black, this variation, you need to study also all sorts of sidelines. So Queen E2, Bishop E7, Rook D1. Actually, very logical way of playing. Just trying to attack the D5 pawn. Bishop C5 after Queen E2. First of all, white has Bishop E3. This variation is not so simple, but also probably Knight BD2 is a bit dangerous. So normally black is playing Bishop E7. The idea is that now if Knight BD2, it's always most of the time in this variation, black shouldn't exchange on D2. Because here Bishop D2, Rook D1, white is just better. So black's reaction once white starts to attack this knight on E4, so black's reaction is whether to move it to C5, whether to play F5. Well, here F5 is obviously not possible. But Knight C5 is perfectly fine. The Queen on E2 is not doing well, so black is okay. So the idea is Rook D1, castles, and now black's position is seemingly quite shaky because of this D5 pawn and this pin on the D line. But again, there was a lot of lots of games here, and seems that black is always in time to equalize. So C4 is the most dangerous move. Sometimes white is trying to play C3, but now I think Knight C5 is a old main line. I saw even computers actually nowadays are trying to play Queen D7, Bishop C2, F5, which is a bit tricky, but again, a bit risky. But I think the final assessment is quite okay for black here. But Knight C5 is an old main line, Bishop C2 and Bishop G4. Again, in these positions, black has to be very concrete, his play. Because if white just manages his Knight D2, Knight B3, or Knight D2, Knight F1, or even Bishop E3, Knight D2, he just needs a couple of tempis and he will be better simply. So you need to know really this variation move per move if you play it. Bishop G4 is a very important move, attacking the pawn on E5, and let's say B4, then Knight A4. Not an easy move to play over the board, so you better know it. But Bishop F4, Queen D7, there is some theory, but it seems that black is okay here. Therefore, most of top players, they play C4 in this position. And now BC4, Bishop takes C4, Bishop C5 is considered to be the best move. Bishop E3, exchanging, and Queen B8 is a very important resource. bishop b3, and now the main move is knight a5. Well, actually, queen b6 is also very close to a draw. I think knight a5 and the theory, as in most of the lines in open Spanish, is still going on and on here. There are many games, but again, it seems that if Black analyze it, knows it move per move, he is capable of equalizing here. So queen a2 is a very serious try, very principal move, but seems to be holding. Black seems to hold here. Then another move is bishop e3. Well, also makes sense. So white wants to develop first bishop on e3 and then to play knight d2, c3. Here, well, bishop c5 is actually not too bad. Actually, maybe it also objectively equalizes, but those positions, let's say queen e2, castles, rook d1, bishop e3, queen e3, again, strategically are very dangerous. So white just needs to develop now, and then this hole on c5, this weak square c5 can become a very serious problem for Black in the position. Well, Black has to be, as always, very concrete. Knight a5, knight d2, let's say, taken on d2 already, now c6, c3, and again, this position is, computers, they manage to equalize it, but strategically, it's quite dangerous, in my opinion, for Black. So again, if you just miss one or two tempes, white plays queen f4, bishop c2, knight g5, or of course, if you take on b3, ab, puts pawn on b4, he's strategically almost winning already. So bishop c5 is a bit dubious move. I think most of players prefer bishop e7. c3, castles, knight bd2. This is the main tabby of this bishop e3 variation. It can also appear via the other move order, which is c3, and if Black plays bishop e7, now white can play bishop e3. So it's a very important position, so here for quite a long time queen d7 was the main move, and huge theory here. Rook e1, lots of games. Again, Black is very close to equalize, but white is always a little bit better. But the problem nowadays is that, again, this bishop g4 move was considered to be well, slightly dangerous, so to say. And nobody wanted, before the computer era, nobody wanted really to enter those positions and to fight for a draw. But nowadays, computers, I think bishop g4 is almost forcing a draw. I mean, knight takes e4, d4, queen d5. That is the main point of white against bishop g4. And, well, both positions considered to be slightly dangerous after queen takes d5 or ef3. But nowadays, I think engines are holding each of those lines quite convincingly. So, for instance, ef3, queen takes e6, fg, queen takes g2, pretty forced play, queen d7, and now bishop h6. Otherwise, Black has no problem. But bishop h6 is an important resource. Gh, f3. And now rook a8, don't ask me why, is the best move. And still, of course, yeah, Black is just fighting for a draw here. But, well, the position is also, you see, very direct. And it seems that in all lines, with the help of engines, Black is holding here quite well, without too many problems. Or also queen takes d5. This is another endgame, which ef3, bishop c6, fg. And now white has king takes g2, even sometimes playing rook fc1, trying to get c4. Again, before computer era, I think Black were a bit afraid to enter this endgame because of the potential weakness of the queen side. But nowadays engines are also holding it quite convincingly. You know, it seems like, well, actually, if you study it carefully, it's probably just a draw. This position. That's why bishop e3, bishop e7. Now the ball is on the white's side because of this bishop g4 variation, and that is a reason why it also went slightly out of fashion on the top level. Therefore, now there are two main moves, I would say, in this position: c3 or knight bd2. There is well, it might lead to the same position. Sometimes it leads to the same position, but each of those moves gives Black a very interesting additional option. So if you're playing this open Spanish with black, then you have a choice. So whether you go to this position, which is c3, let's say we are this move 4, the bishop e7, knight bd2. This is a tabia. So, I can say that with black you can have it. If you want, you have it. And white cannot really force black to get into this position. Black has a choice. So if you are happy with this variation, which I'm going to show you in a second, then you just play it against both c3 or knight bd2. But let's say the difference is that after knight bd2, black can again play bishop e7, and now white's probably best c3, because knight takes e4 here leads to a, nominally slightly better endgame for white, but computers again are already drawing it without any problem. So takes knight g5. If bishop takes g5, queen h5 check, obviously. So queen d1, rook d1, takes on g5, takes, castles, a4, h6. You can check this with engines. It seems like it's a draw. I mean, a little bit of still couple of accurate moves are required, but all games of computers end in a draw here, and it probably means that the position is just drawish. That's why on bishop e7, probably white's best is anyway to play c3 here. But if white starts with knight bd2, then a very serious variation is, of course, knight c5 here. Knight c5, and after c3, d4. Old line, many of you remember the Kasparov-Anand match, 1995, when Kasparov won a beautiful game, sacrificing the rook on a1. So at that time, I was actually second of Kasparov in this match, so we analyzed a lot those knight g5 variation. Actually, knight g5 is a beautiful move, which was discovered before computer era. Was by Grandmaster Zaitsev, who was a trainer of Anatoly Karpov. They discovered this move. Actually, you need quite an imagination to find this move. So knight g5 was, for a very long time, was the main line, and that was what Kasparov played against Viswanathan in the match. Queen takes g5, queen f3. Okay, there are many other ways of playing, but queen takes g5, queen f3. Actually, black has quite a problem with the knight on c6. But now, there is a very direct line. Long castle, bishop takes e6 check, f e6, queen takes e6, queen takes e5. Extremely direct. And I remember before the match, actually, we analyzed a lot with Gary this position. Before queen d5, again, at that time, there were no computers, or there were very weak engines. So we were mainly analyzing it, together over the board. Queen d5, e d5, bc5, dc3, knight b3, d4. What a position. The pawns are running. Hard to say who is better and why. Actually, it is white who is fighting for advantage. White has no risk. And this position, bishop a3, if I remember the main move, and our analysis were going on and on here. But of course, nowadays, the machines are very powerful machines. And I think the final assessment here that actually it's practically a forced draw. But you need to know a lot of variations. You need to remember it. But I think it's basically a draw. That's why knight g5, and after knight g5, white has no way out from this position. So that's why knight g5 is not so fashionable anymore. And so bishop takes e6 now is played mainly. Knight takes e6, c takes d4, knight takes d4. This is another tabia, actually, which was played in the Karpov-Korchnoi match in 78. And knight e4 was considered to be the main move always. Also, it has some venom. Usually black is playing bishop e7 here. Lately, I think the main line is bishop e3, knight f5, and so on. Of course, still black has to be accurate, but it seems that, with time, black found ways to equalize here, and seems that it's not a big danger. But then Karpov team came in 1981, and Merano came with this a4 novelty, which is, again, before computer era. And it still considers to be the most dangerous move here. a lot of theory here. I wouldn't say that there is no clear way for black to equalize, like just to make a forced draw, but it's very close. Actually, it's this type of position which, frankly, you don't want to play with both colors, because with white, you think that it's too little, and probably your opponent is a good player, and will probably make a draw here. With black, maybe you don't want to play because it's not totally equal. It's just a little worse still. But anyway, it's a very serious line for black after knight bd2, and if you manage to analyze it and to hold it well, then knight bd2 actually is having a problem, because this position is very direct also. I think bishop e7 is one move, but the main line is bishop b4, and after ab, let's say after knight f3, ab5, one of the main lines, rook a8, queen a8, well, black just needs to castle and he will be not worse at all. But white has this very important knight g5 move, and still I remember analyzing it again long time ago, and it was, I wanted to play it with black, but it was not so easy to get it to a clear draw. So white was always posing some problems here, but maybe nowadays engines are already managing it, a draw here. But there is also a solid move, knight takes b5, and then the game is more positional. Black, of course, black manages to castle. He has a healthy position, just that the pawn structure is a little bit compromised, so it is not much for white, very little, but still not totally equal. So that is a situation in many variations of in Ruy Lopez knight takes e4. So it's practically a draw, practically equal. Almost nothing for white, and computers often are showing that it's 0-0, but in fact, sometimes in a practical game, white still manages to win such positions or to pose some practical problems. So that is about knight bd2, and then c3. Let's come to the c3 move. So again, as I've mentioned, bishop e7 is a main move, but here, again, if you don't want with black to play this position, this main position, then you can choose bishop c5. You need, again, as always, you need to know a lot of theory here, a lot of variations, but it seems to me that, according to the modern state of theory, black is managing a draw here. Managing an equality, even though, of course, the positions are very unbalanced after bishop c5 in the main lines, and this can change with the new engines. So it's a very tricky line. You need to, so if you play it with black, you have to be ready that one day it will be refuted. It's not impossible, I would say, but for now, I think that it's not refuted yet. So white has a safe choice of playing queen e2, castles, bishop e3, but then here black is in time to take and play f6. Very important to get f6, and ef, queen f6, let's say knight bd2, knight d2, queen d2, rook d8. In fact, it seems like completely nothing for white, but it's not so easy, because again, because of this pawn structure on the queen side and the pawn on c7, so I think black still has to be accurate here to equalize, but with a precise play is capable of equalizing. But the main test is knight bd2, castles. Now queen e2 is harmless because of bishop f5, bishop c2, and this is a tabia. There are many moves played. I think Korchnoi liked to play bishop f5 against Karpov, but knight b3, and I think he even won one game here with black, but objectively nowadays it considers to be not enough to equalize. Then there is f5 move. I think also black is experiencing problems now here after knight b3 and knight d4. Probably not enough to equalize also. So the main move is knight takes f2. Actually, rook takes f2, f6. This is the old main line. And ef, bishop f2, king f2, queen f6. Well, I will not show you all the theory here, and a lot of lines are going as far as to move 40 here. Again, it has to be checked with very powerful engines nowadays. in my time, I spent quite some time analyzing this position, this variation. I saw that if black knows very well what he's doing, a lot of lines, but black was always in time to equalize here, basically. But you need to, of course, this position you cannot just play over the board, especially if your opponent is prepared, because it's there is a lot of theory and which goes on and on, So this is so bishop c5 is not refuted in my opinion. Maybe it's even objectively equalizing, but you need to be very well prepared there. That's why bishop e7 is a safer choice, because here, there is bishop e3 move which transposed to the bishop e3 variation. There are some little ideas, a4, but again, you can check it, but in general, it's not too dangerous, considered at least not very dangerous. So main move is knight bd2, and that is a tabia. So this position is a very important position of the open Spanish. Knight takes e4 variation, knight bd2. Now black has a choice. Actually, lately I see more top players are playing castle, this variation, bishop c2, f5. So it was considered to be a bit dubious, slightly worse for black, but they're holding here, because let's say ef, knight f6, rook e1, bishop g4, let's say h3, bishop h5. It was always considered to be okay for black, but now there are some new games. White is trying to play knight f1, bishop c5, and very tactical position. I think that black should be able to equalize here. He has active game and no weaknesses, but very concrete play. Again, the computer preparation is very important here, and you need to check it carefully. But always the main line was knight b3, queen d7, knight d4. So knight takes d4, knight takes d4. This is a c5. It's a well-known variation. Knight e6, queen e6, f3, knight g5. In general, it looks quite dubious for black, because white has two bishops, etc. The only thing that, of course, if e4 black, then will have a very powerful knight on e4. So knight g5, white's plan is usually here to take on g5, at some point play f4, and then try to get g4, something like that. So usually it starts with a4, let's say rook d8, takes, and then there were many games here. Of course, black is just fighting for a draw here. No doubt that he has, normally not the slightest chance to take the initiative in this position. But again, a lot of theory, a lot of computer preparation here. Let's say takes f4, bishop e7. But seemingly, black is holding here. Even though you need, again, there are some traps. For example, king h1. White quite often wants to play g4 in this position, and actually very often can develop a dangerous attack. So I think the main theory goes like king h8, queen e2, c4, and of course, if you're a top player, you still have notes further on from this position. If you are not, I think you can stop here and just play it with black. I think it's definitely holding. You just have to be sure that this g4, you always have a reaction, something in mind against g4 plan. So this castle is a very serious variation, of course. I mean, a bit passive, like really playing for a draw, but not refuted yet. And the knight c5, also not really trying to play for a win, obviously, but also a very important, very direct line, bishop c2, and now d4. Of course, if castles, again, knight b3, queen d7, for instance, rook e1, white is just better here. So you stop d4, and then, so the whole black's play doesn't make sense anymore. Again, I want to mention that this variation open Ruy Lopez is very direct, so you need to play very, very concrete chess here. That's why bishop c2, d4 is important. And, that is a variation which was extremely popular a few years ago. Very, very forcing line, because black in general has no problem. It's just his development. If he castles, he will simply have an excellent position. So very direct line. Maybe it is objectively holding for black, but again, I guess you need to be a professional here to play it, because you need to, there are quite some attempts white has. For example, knight b3 is one of the moves. Actually, knight e4 is also possible, but after d3, white plays knight takes c5, and dc2 leads to the same position. That's why most of the players who like to play it, they play knight b3 first. Also because after d3, knight takes c5 is not necessary. But c takes d4 is a serious move as well. Knight d4, queen d4, knight f3. Now queen d1, rook d1. Actually, this endgame, because white wants bishop e3, knight d4, is seemingly slightly worse. And I remember that was basically the reason why this variation considered to be not sufficient for black, not enough for equality. But again, nowadays, with computer help and a lot of practice, it seems that black, if he analyze this position well, he knows exactly how to play against each of white's attempts to fight for advantage. It seems that black holds here in this position. That's why knight b3 is now considered to be the main move. The idea is that after dc, knight c5, bishop c5, bishop e4, very important intermediate move, which practically forces black to play queen d7, and considers to be not good for black, but actually maybe even this can be holding, but very, very dangerous. So not recommended. All strong players are playing d3 here, and white has a choice between playing a very safe knight takes c5, dc5, dc2, taken on d8, taken on e6, bishop e3, rook d5. Then white is taking this pawn on c2. After rook c1, rook c2, black takes the pawn on e5. There were some games. White tried sometimes to fight for a win in this endgame. Very often it's double rook endgame, but white has this idea of playing a4. Let's say, something like that. This position takes, white takes on c2 immediately, then trying to play a4. White is a little bit better, very little. But again, this position was already analyzed and played for quite some time. And there were games, I remember, for example, Magnus Carlsen tried to win it against Ding Liren, didn't even get close to it. So it seems that black holds here. So now that's why the main test is bishop b1. And, this d3 pawn is hanging, so black takes, plays bishop f5. Bishop e3, and this position is a very, very complicated, very double-edged. So white is trying very often just to surround this d3 pawn and actually to take it. Again, here a lot of theory. This is just a starting point of computer analysis. Lots of games, Caruana, Mamedov, many, many games. I think that there was no clear verdict yet if black holds in every line here. Finally, black is doing fine, or I think Fabiana was coming with some new ideas all the time here. So here you need to check this here, you need to analyze this position. It is very dangerous for black. I mean, without very deep and accurate analysis, you better don't enter here. But again, according to as I understand, to the state of theory, it seems that black is holding here for the moment, even though it can change at any moment. So it can finally, there was maybe some nuance will be found with powerful engines, and finally it will not be equalizing anymore, because the position is very rich and still not, I wouldn't say that the last word has been said here. So all in all, this is knight takes c4 variation. Well, what can I say? A very principled line. I think it's not very fashionable nowadays because, as you see in the main lines, black has to know a lot, to analyze a lot, and most of the time, most of the cases, it's just actually to be able to make a very accurate draw, holding a very nominally slightly worse endgame, for instance, or middle game, and just with accurate move make a draw. Not really to everyone's liking, but again, a very principal variation. And if you analyze it well, if you happy with this type of position, if you are sure about your analysis, and maybe even more important about the capacity of your memory, then it's definitely playable. Again, I don't think that white objectively has any clear way to get an advantage in this opening. But yeah, again, this is a type of opening line you need to mentally to be ready to play such variations. And with white, there is quite a number of choice, and definitely you can always find something for one game. But again, as a top player, I remember playing e4 sometimes and playing against somebody who is extremely well prepared and has a good memory like Ding Liren. I was always a bit worried of that it can lead to a kind of forced draw, and my opponent would analyze everything till move 40 and make a forced draw in a slightly worse endgame. So that's always a danger, of course. But again, I think that this from the white side. Players who play Ruy Lopez, they're not so worried about knight takes e4, mainly because of it's like a psychological battle. Mainly because they believe that there are not so many players who are ready to play it, who has a fantastic memory, memorize everything, all those lines, and ready to play this variation. So it's a psychological battle. I would say that after castles. Actually, I think that if let's say in a match, a player would always take on e4 and just try to make a draw, on the top level, maybe white will switch to Italian or fifth d3. But if white castle, then maybe not every player will actually want to play knight takes e4. So a strange variation, which is kind of slightly uncomfortable for both sides in a certain sense. But all in all, a serious variation. So that is all about open Spanish or open Ruy Lopez, castles knight takes e4. And now, next lesson, we are going to move to all this concept when Blake is trying to develop his bishop on c5. And after, we are going to move to the classical Ruy Lopez with bishop going to e7.